Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is an Ask Me Anything Casual Friday podcast. So, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I posted in the community tab on my YouTube channel here asking people if they had questions for me. I was planning on doing a segment in an upcoming Casual Friday, like an Ask a Knitter segment, and I was soliciting for questions that people would have. And I never know how many questions I'm going to get or what type of questions I'm going to get. So I got way more than I could ever do in a single video. So I decided to divide them up into kind of three general categories. One category I will handle today, and that category is questions about me and my knitting. So I'll answer those questions today. The second category is questions about technique, and they're things that could be answered fairly easily or would be good for discussion in a Casual Friday. And so those I'm saving for an episode maybe in the fall, so that I can pre-record some Casual Friday when I'm planning on being traveling, so that I won't have to skip a video. And then the third category are things that I think could potentially be good Technique Tuesday videos, like devote a whole technique video to that rather than having it as a part of a segment in a Casual Friday. Today, I am going to be answering questions about me and my knitting. The first question comes from Leah Gaird, S8E15. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Their question is, what are some of your favorite pieces you've ever made? It could be for any reason. Sentimental, fun to make, new and interesting, pretty yarn. So there are three things that I could think of because I just really enjoy knitting, and I enjoy designing my own things sometimes. I enjoy exploring new construction methods. There's a lot of things. I'm always trying to learn things. I've said that a million times. So I think the three things that I just sort of really love the most, the first one would be the sweater that I knit. The pattern was published in 1904. It was an Edwardian era sweater, and it was the sweater that kicked off this long-term project. I think I spent close to 4 years knitting a sweater from each decade, from the 1890s to the 1990s. I had no intention of doing any sort of long-term project like that. It was I was looking for what sort of patterns might have been published in the newspapers 100, 150 years ago, because I was trying to think of Casual Friday topics, and knitting history I knew was interesting to a number of viewers and was interesting to me. And I happened to come across this image of a sweater that was published in the Boston Globe, and I loved that Edwardian era silhouette. I was fascinated that it could be done in a sweater, wondered if I'd be able to understand the instructions, didn't have any trouble. Drew a schematic as I was reading it because I wasn't sure where I was in the pattern when it started. And I realized that this pattern destroyed all of my preconceived notions about what knitting was like back then. And I wanted to learn more. And there was something about that particular pattern specifically that I couldn't figure out just by reading the pattern. And it was one of the finishing instructions about kind of how it was all brought together in the front. And I ended up trying to talk myself out of knitting that sweater for 4 days before I just gave in and said, well, I'm going to knit it until I figure out the answer. Because maybe when I get to a certain point, it will be obvious to me once I have the knitting in my hands. It will be obvious what I can't see in my head but it will be in my hands. By the time I got to that point, I had learned so much that I hadn't expected to learn, that I wanted to finish the sweater. And then I also started researching patterns in the decades before and after that. And that was when I was like, I need to do this project. I love that sweater because of how it led me into this bigger project, but also I just love the silhouette. It's not a sweater that I would ever wear out in public. Some people have told me, oh, I'd wear that. Then make the sweater and then you can wear it. I just wouldn't wear it, but I do love it. And I love what I learned from it and what I learned after that, and all because of that pattern. So if you haven't been looking up at the screen, I will make sure to put the image up there now so that you can see what it looks like, and pictures of my daughter modeling it. She did wear it a couple of times. I don't know, it was probably 6 years ago, and she felt like that style was in fashion, and so she wanted to wear it, and then she gave it back to me. The second thing is a pair of fingerless mitts. I designed these myself, and I designed them when I got really interested in Bavarian, Austrian, traveling twisted stitch patterns. And I didn't want to knit a whole stocking or anything. I wanted to design a pair of fingerless mitts that you incorporated these stitch patterns. I was really happy with my design and how it turned out. And I actually submitted the pattern to Knitty. I had taken a class from Amy Singer, who publishes Knitty here in Minneapolis. She was here for Yarn Over, and she was talking about what kinds of patterns and Knitty likes, and how to go through the process of submitting. And people in the class had brought things that they were thinking about submitting, and she gave feedback on them. And I remember showing her the mitts, and she really looked at them for a long time, and she's like, these are really thoughtfully designed. And she did encourage me to submit. And so I did, and she kept the pattern on hold for a while. She's like, it's not right for this issue, but can I hold on to it in case I want it for the next issue? I said, sure. And then she didn't want it for that issue. But I could tell that she really liked the pattern, but she just couldn't find a way to put it in the magazine. And that was a time when I think Knitty would have paid me about $50 or $75 for that pattern. And then I would still own the copyright. I would still be able to do whatever I wanted with it. Knitty is a free magazine and all of that. There might have been like a 1-year waiting period or something. I don't even know, because I didn't publish with them. But I decided to release it myself, and I ended up making so much more money on that pattern than I would have made from Knitty. So I didn't need the exposure that Knitty would have given me, and also I didn't have a lot of other patterns. Even if it had been published and people really liked it and they wanted to see more of what I had published, I wouldn't have had much to sell to them. So it ended up working out really well. But I love those mitts. And I ended up designing a couple of other mitts as well with the Bavarian traveling twisted stitch patterns. And the palms had an interesting stitch pattern that I varied from mitt to mitt as well. Those were some mittens that I really liked. I think one of the designs I ended up getting a first place at the state fair. So those, I have a soft spot in my heart for those mitts. And the third thing is a gray sweater. I used to wear a lot. I wore it a couple of times this winter. Put that on the screen so you can see it. I call it gray silhouette. I had decided years ago, I was still working on the Master Hand Knitting program. I wanted to sort of define a basic silhouette for a sweater for myself. I really like set-in sleeves. There's certain things I really like, and I wanted to establish, the dimensions of that so that I could just go to that and design, sweater after sweater after sweater. And I was using the light gray color, and I had knit the back, and then I knit the two fronts with the cable detail. Then I put it to the side for some reason, and it was in my office, and every time I came across it, I would think, oh, I really like those cables. I should finish this sweater, and I never did. And then in 2016, I did, went through, I got rid of half of my yarn stash, because it's a 30-year accumulation of projects that never got started or that got abandoned or leftover yarn, all this yarn that I was never going to use. So I got rid of half of it, and that allowed me to put things away. And then I reorganized my books, and finally I went through all my projects, and I realized there were 44 of them that were unfinished. And so I spent that year finishing things, and one of the things that I was really excited to finish was that sweater. So I blocked the two front pieces in the back, and I have a blocking pad that is like, has a grid with inches on it, and I remember thinking, why is this one wider than the other one? And I went and counted stitches, and I realized I'd made one of the two fronts an inch wider than the other. And so while I was trying to decide which one I was going to re-knit so that they both matched, I looked at what I had done in the front edges where the opening of this cardigan was going to be, and I realized there was a huge design flaw, and then I thought that's probably why I put it to the side. I probably knew that there were two different sizes, or maybe I knit one of them a different size to decide, if I like that better, but then I realized that there's just this design flaw. And so I needed to rip out the both fronts and re-knit them. And when I went to look for the yarn, I did not have much of it left, and I realized that I hadn't stored the yarn with the sweater, and so it had been in my stash, and I just had used it over the years for different things. So that's where the dark gray yarn entered into it, and I had to kind of figure out how I was going to, where I was going to use the light gray and where I was going to use the dark gray. So once it was finished, I really liked it. I also like the opening is just, there's a clothing magnet in there. So it's very easy to just put on and close it. It's a technique I want to use in another sweater at some point. So anyway, those are the three things that I think are my favorite things that I have ever knit. This next question is from, I don't even know how to pronounce it. Who can ting ting? I'm only 3 years into knitting, and my family is saying soon I'll have more sweater thanks I can possibly wear. How do you deal with the surplus of garments, accessories, even home goods? I knit for other people. When I did that year of finishing things, I found 17 pairs of unfinished socks. There were a couple of pairs that the yarn just wasn't right for the pattern, which is why I put it to the side. So I just reclaimed the yarn. But I finished all of those. A couple of pairs of those were given away to different people. But I ended up with, close to 15 pairs of new socks in my drawer, and I already probably had 25 pair. And so I knew I didn't need any more socks, but I still wanted to keep knitting socks. So I started knitting socks for other people. I would knit for my mother, I'd knit for my daughter, I'd knit for my daughter's friends, I would knit for my friends. So I kept knitting socks, they just weren't for me. So then they don't end up in the house. Sweaters, I live in Minnesota, I need sweaters. And I go through for phases where there's like 4 or 5 sweaters that I really like that I tend to wear a lot. And then I'll notice I'm not wearing other sweaters as much. So I still haven't washed all my sweaters from this past winter. So as I do that, I'm going to clear out some of them. And I don't know what I'll do with them. But yeah, you can knit for other people who, whether they live in your house or not. Service knitting is something that I know a lot of other people in our Knitters Guild. They'll do that because they want to keep knitting and they don't need everything. The The essential thing is to find who you're going to knit for. And most, if you have a knitters guild in your area, they more than likely have some sort of service project. Otherwise, sometimes people have charity or service knitting through their church, or they might be in a group associated with a particular hospital or something like that. There's different ways of finding service projects. So you find out what it is that they need specifically, and more importantly, what sort of yarn they want to knit in, because most places are going to want machine washable. And so they may say acrylic, or they might take an acrylic wool blend. Some places it won't matter, but they will have things that they care about. So just because you knit a beautiful Fair Isle hat in 5 different bright colors doesn't mean that an organization like we have here in the Twin Cities called Hats for the Homeless, mostly for men who are trying to be invisible on the streets, have to be 100% wool, don't have to be machine washable, but they need to be a pretty dark, plain colors, nothing that's going to attract attention. And then other places are going to really want those brightly colored things. So that's my answer: knitting for other people, including friends and family, but also service knitting. This question comes from Yvonne's Crafty Adventures. Finally, a username I can pronounce. I would love to know what you do with all the samples that you knit for, say, Technique Tuesday. Do you unravel them and use the wool again? So the answer is, it depends. I actually did clear off the desk from Technique Tuesday, so I have a few things on here. So this is something that was on the needles, and it's been pulled off the needles. It's just a tiny little thing. It's still connected to the ball of yarn, so I absolutely will unravel that and wind it back on to this ball. I have a few other swatches here on my desk from a previous Technique Tuesday video. They're showing things like the Estonian cast on, and I had some swatches that compared it to other cast on methods, which I don't think made it into the video. So these are, off the needles. They've been bound off. This is the kind of thing where I might save them, maybe in a baggie, but probably not, because then I'd have to find that baggie. And I mean, I do have over here some bins where I store samples, and those are usually really large samples that I absolutely want to keep. And like, I have a whole huge Ziploc bag full of different sock heels that I have used for different videos. And I do go through those once in a while and pull them out so that I can show comparison between that kind of heel and some other kind of heel. A lot of times I will rip it out. If it's still on the needles and connected to the ball of yarn, I'll just rip it out and reuse it. If it's something like this, or like this is something that was on the needles, but I had cut it before I had it on camera, I'm not probably going to save this. Although it's enough yarn, I might be able to use it. You rip it out, or maybe just leave it like this and put it back in the bin that I use for swatching. But a lot of times, if it's a little swatch, I just throw them away. Some people wouldn't agree with that. They want to save everything, or at least save the yarn. And I don't do scrappy projects. If I do need to do another swatch, I can't guarantee that this is enough for me to do what I need to do. So it's a bigger hassle than just starting with a fresh ball where I know I'm going to have enough yarn. This next question comes from @CatherineJelly4437. With so many fabulous projects flying off the needles, I'm curious about the storage of your finished projects. Do you own a vast warehouse? Do you have seasonal rotation? How do you guard against moths? Have you ever thrown away an old home knit? Do you give them to friends, family, charity shops? Frog them? Is there a month in the year, like finish it February, when you decide what to do with your knits? Do you repair them when they develop a hole? I don't wear everything that I make. Some things, the whole point of making it is to learn something new. And so there's at least half of the sweaters that I made for my project where I knit a sweater from each decade. Those are things that I'm never going to wear. And those are stored here in bins. And some of them I wear occasionally, and they are in my closet. So I have a pretty big closet and I don't really have a lot of clothes, but I do have a lot of sweaters. But I have a big shelf and I have some dividers so I can stack 2 or 3 sweaters up. I'll see if I can take a picture and insert it on the screen so you can see. And then I have a hanging sweater storage thing as well. I have thrown away, it's the one that I grieve about the most. I threw away the very first top that I ever made. Like, I learned to knit and that's what I made. It was a sleeveless V-neck top made with white cotton nubbly yarn. And I thought I was going to be clever and unique. And I wanted to do the ribbing in a contrasting color, and red was my favorite color. So I got this red pearl cotton yarn, much smoother and probably easier to knit the ribbing with as well. And that's what I did. And I didn't know anything about washing or blocking back then. Thank goodness, because otherwise the sweater would have been ruined before I ever got to wear it. So I wore it quite a bit that summer, and then of course it got a little sweaty and I wanted to wash it. So I very carefully filled up a sink with cold water and some shampoo or something like that and let it soak, and that red pearl cotton just bled into the white yarn, and I had like pink streaks in it, and it just made me sick. But I had knit that when I was living in Ireland. I was back in the US for just a year, and then I was going to be in New Zealand for a year. I didn't have a place to put it. I wasn't ever going to wear it again, and so I did throw that sweater out. And I wish I had stored it at my mom's house or something, but it just didn't occur to me that 40 years later I would wish I had that first thing just as a sentimental item. Most other things that I have that are older, because I knit for my niece and nephew and family members a lot when I was a newer knitter, and then I had kids and I knit for them a lot. So I hadn't knit myself a ton of sweaters. All I knit was sweaters, but I'd been knitting for a lot of other people. So in 2005, when I started the Master Hand Knitting program, and then I really started making sweaters for myself. So that's just been accumulating for the past 20 years. So I do have sweaters that I don't wear, and I don't know what to do with them. Some of them are kind of ratty, but I haven't gotten rid of any of those yet. I do have another storage place in my bedroom. We have a lot of storage, and because I don't have a lot of clothes that I actually wear, I have a lot of room to store that stuff. How do I guard against moths? I don't really do anything. I just wash my sweaters at the end of the season. I don't worry about it here in my office. I'm in here all day with bright lights and making noise, and moths are looking for someplace dark and quiet. And if I had ever had a problem with moths in my knitwear, I'd probably have something I do, but I never have ever my whole life. So I don't worry about it, but I do make sure that I clean my sweaters because they're going to be attracted to things that are dirty, so that when the larvae hatch, that they have something to eat. Do I repair any of them? I do repair and finish at February. Sometimes I fix things. I might re-knit a neckline, or I might re-knit a cuff, or I might modify in some other way. So I do fix things, and I actually have 2 Aran sweaters that both have issues at the cuffs that I need to address. It might not happen until next February, but both of them need to be addressed. They're raveling at the wrist because I wear them so much and they're so worn, and they're both old. One's almost 20 years old, one's almost 30 years old, at least 30 years old. So that's what I do. Not everybody has the kind of space to store things that I have, or they have the space, but it's filled with a lot more clothes than what I wear. Emma Candland 9755 asks, how did you go from knitter to knitting teacher? I want to teach my friends or maybe one day teach at a yarn shop, but it's so difficult. Do you have any tips on teaching knitting effectively? It took me a long time to decide that I could be a knitting teacher. In fact, I had said for a number of years, oh, I could never teach knitting because I knit funny. Because I am a self-taught knitter, I couldn't hold the needles in the way that the books showed, and I didn't think it would be right to teach people how to knit based on the way I knit. It didn't seem practical. When I started the Master Hand Knitting program, I started exploring other knitting styles. I started exploring other ways of holding needles and other types of needles. I'd always used long straight needles that I would anchor the right hand needle against my hip, and then I would touch the right hand needle, but I didn't hold it. When I started the Master Hand Knitting program, I also started knitting a lot of other things besides sweaters, like socks. And so I was knitting things in the round, and I wanted to be able to do that more easily. I tried a knitting belt. It didn't work for me. I tried a lot of things that would allow me to continue using my knitting style and knit in the round, and it didn't work well. So I learned other knitting styles. And once I felt like I had learned enough that I was flexible in how I could teach, then I felt like I knew enough to start teaching. That doesn't mean you have to be like me. I'm the kind of person who really wants to understand something, and so I want to be able to answer any question, and I don't mind saying I don't know something, but I don't want to say I don't know something because I know so little. That's me. There are other people who want to teach somebody. As soon as they learn something, they want to teach someone else. And that's their personality. I will say that when I was teaching beginners, we would have a limit of 4 people in a class, where normally we would have up to 8 because it was in a yarn shop. So there wouldn't be room for 20 people anyway. But for beginners, they need so much one-on-one help and supervision. And it's mentally taxing for them and for you as the teacher to try to suggest, okay, hold things this way, or try this, or try that, and just giving them feedback. So I would recommend, especially if you're kind of nervous and it seems hard, just try teaching one person. And again, if it seems like they're struggling with how you're teaching them, don't be embarrassed about going onto YouTube and saying, if you knit English and you can't knit continental, and it seems like they want to hold the yarn in their left hand, get a video on continental knitting and help them with that, because you can still help them in other ways. And so even if you can't knit continental, but you understand what's going on, that could be helpful. Again, not required. So that's how I would start. Then there are also programs, like I did this, it's through the Craft Yarn Council. They have a education program for teachers, and you can get the certification process. You do swatches and you write lesson plans, and then there's a teacher that you mail them to, and that you have a discussion with them on the phone, and you get feedback from them. And so that's pretty interactive. And then the TKGA that does the Master Hand Knitting program, they have a number of programs and courses. And one of them is something about a certified teacher. I don't really know anything about that program because that was introduced after I had done the one through Craft Yarn Council. I didn't feel like I needed to do another one. I did the one through the Craft Yarn Council because I was teaching and I had never taken a knitting class, and I just wanted feedback on my materials from somebody who knew more about teaching than I did. I was used to teaching, but I wasn't used to teaching knitting, and I wasn't really sure if I was doing it right, in which there is no right way. But the main thing is to watch and listen to the student. And it also depends on the age of the student. If it was a kid, I might have them on my lap with my arms around them and have them do something like wrap the yarn, like, and just get used to watching what all the steps are before they would have to do them all. But that's my recommendation, is just, kind of figure out how to get started, maybe cast on for them. Don't teach them to cast on until after you've taught them the knit stitch. And don't make them knit a garter stitch scarf before you teach them the purl stitch. Don't make them knit a garter stitch scarf at all. Have them knit something really small. I have a pattern, a free pattern that I created for my beginning students because they always wanted to know, well, what are we going to make? And I'm like, you're not going to make anything. You're going to learn to knit. What do you want to make? And some of them had no idea. So I'm like, okay, I'll come up with a pattern, and it's basically a stockinette square with garter stitch edges that can then be seamed together along the cast on and bind off edges, leaving a gap for the thumb. And so I always, it was a quick thing. It teaches them knits and purls. It teaches them switching between knits and purls in a row without having to do it like constantly like you would with ribbing. Gets them used to reading a pattern. Once it's done, they can either decide to knit the second one and actually turn them into mitts, or they can just say, that's my first project, it's a coaster, now I want to pick something out myself. So be flexible, I guess, is the main thing, and follow their lead and help guide them if they're asking for guidance. At Tova Carver 6049 has a question: how does one become a certified master hand knitter? So I mentioned TKGA, the Knitting Guild Association. They're the ones that have this program. Their website, I'll put it on the screen, and I'll put it down in the show notes, tkga.org. So they have a description of what the program is. There is a very active Ravelry group where you can get support and ask questions of other people who are going through the program. There's 3 levels to it, and you do a bunch of swatches for each level. You do at least one project for each level, and you answer questions, and usually have to write a report or reviews or whatever. So there is a fair amount of writing involved. I never thought of it as writing. Answering questions didn't feel like writing to me. I mean, yeah, writing a 2 or 3 page report, I guess, is writing. But I don't have writing anxiety, and some people do. They also have a professional knitters program, which focuses on the knitting rather than having to do writing. So they have a lot more courses. Like TKGA started, the whole reason it started was to be able to create this master hand knitting program. So that was the program that they had. And then they started doing these other courses like basics that a lot of people take before they do the master hand knitting program, just to make sure that their skills are where they need to be and that they understand this process. And with that, that's an actual class where you get feedback from a teacher, and you can interact with them and ask questions at much lower stress level, where the Master Hand Knitting program is not a class with a curriculum where they're teaching you. They're like, here's what you need to know, go figure it out. And then when you have mastered that, you create those swatches and you explain yourself with references and all that. It's not for everyone. I did do my second Casual Friday episode was about the program, and that was much sooner after I completed it in 2012, and that video was in 2018, and now it's 2025. So it's been a long time since I did it, and it changes. You know, they adapt things, they move projects, so they change projects, or they move things around, or, you know, add swatches or remove them. I don't know. I don't keep up. I don't know what the program exactly is now. That's where you can get that information. At David Hensley 76 asks, do you know anyone who knits from necessity, meaning they are cold and so they make a sweater, hat, scarf, etc.? Well, I do, but it depends on what you mean by necessity. Like, I have the money to go to a store and buy these things. I prefer to make them myself. I don't need more sweaters. I have enough sweaters. I love to knit, and so I knit things that I can use. Like, I really like knitting hats, but I don't need more hats, so I've been trying to figure out ways of knitting hats that I can donate instead, especially if I'm trying to figure out new techniques. I have a whole bin full of hats that I don't wear and I can't donate because they're 100% non-washable wool, and you know, all kinds of things. I don't buy socks, I don't buy scarves, I don't buy hats. Sometimes I will knit something that I want or need that I don't know that I could find anywhere easily. A couple of winters ago, we go for a walk every night at 6:30, even if it's 20 below Fahrenheit outside, and I wanted an extra layer in my upper body and neck. And so I kind of knew what I wanted. I wanted what we would call a dickie here in the US, like a turtleneck that had kind of a bib in the front and in the back. So I went on Ravelry and I looked and I found something. I had the yarn. It did need a mohair yarn. I bought that. Very rarely going to be cheaper to make something than buy it. I mean, I suppose there are people who are stuck in the woods somewhere with a stash of yarn and needles and patterns, and they need new mittens and they have to make them. But most people aren't going to be making them because they have no way of getting them in other ways. But definitely in Minnesota, we need warm clothing. And so I would prefer to make it myself. And these are things I need. So if that's, I'm knitting out of necessity, then I'm knitting out of necessity. This last one is from Heather Jones 9523, and Heather asks, how does one get started in designing patterns? This is, to me, kind of an ambiguous question. I don't know what Heather means by designing patterns. So there are stitch patterns, and if you're wanting to design a stitch pattern yourself, you just experiment. You might get out some graph paper, and if you want to do a knit purl pattern and see if you can design something and then knit it up and see if it works out the way that you were hoping. So that's one kind of designing patterns. Another is if you are trying to design a specific garment or accessory, like how do you design that? That requires understanding like what the finished size of the thing is that you want to make, and is it made in pieces, and what are those shapes, and then understanding gauge and therefore how to fill up that particular shape, and you know, if it starts out smaller and gets bigger, how do you calculate how often you need to increase? Or if it's getting smaller, how often do you need to decrease in order for it to be, you know, the size you want it when you get to the end of it? So those are all techniques that you need to understand the specific shape of those garments and the finished measurements. If it's for yourself, then you look at what you have knit before and you study other patterns that are like that. Like, what are they all doing? How are they solving this problem? They're not all going to do it in exactly the same way, because if you want a cardigan with set-in sleeves, you could knit that bottom up flat in pieces. You could knit it bottom up, you know, the body in one piece until the armholes, and then the front and back separately, and then the neck shaping. You could knit the sleeves bottom up flat, and you could sew everything together, or you could knit everything top down, or you could do a hybrid. So you need to look at how things are constructed, study other patterns, and figure out how that's done. One way of getting started in that direction is either by, you already made a sweater that you really like, and so you look at the schematic or the shape of it and what all the shape is, and then see if you can figure out how to do it in a different gauge. So you have to make a stitch count and row count adjustments and to the shaping and everything, try to figure out how to do that. Or you can use the same yarn weight, but maybe use a different stitch pattern and figure out how do you plan out a stitch pattern so that it's going to fill up the space without you know, like if you want whole repeats. Another way would be to use, oh, let me get the books. So another way would be to start with something like Ann Budd's handy book of, this one is Handy Book of Sweater Patterns. These are bottom up flat in pieces mostly. She has another one for top down. She's got a book that's a handy book of patterns. So it's got a few sweaters, but it's got mittens, hats, gloves, scarves, I think vests. It's got a whole bunch of different types of garments, and they're sized from like a 4-year-old child up to an extra large adult. It's not going to be completely size inclusive, but it's going to have a wide range. It's got schematics. It's got all different kinds of gauges so you can understand, you know, how things are done. Those are all ways that you can learn to knit for yourself and then design things like an idea that you have and how do you implement it. But you have to know how that particular type of garment or accessory is constructed and the different ways and the different options that you have. And you do that by reading a lot of patterns and knitting a lot of things in order to understand that. If what you're talking about is designing patterns that you want to publish, that is quite different because you're not designing one specific thing to fit one specific person. You are designing something that has to be able to be sized up and down. And so stitch patterns that you select need to be able to work in all of those different sizes. You have to learn how to grade to those different sizes, and that is much more difficult than a lot of people might think. So you can take classes on that. There's like online classes that you can take that take quite a while to figure out, and designers will often have a spreadsheet that will have all of their graded sizes in it, so that will automatically calculate all the other sizes. They still have to be checked to make sure that things make sense. There are a couple of groups on Ravelry. There's Budding Designers group, and then there's just the Designers group. So those are good resources if you're trying to figure out, well, where do I get a class on this? Or how do I do this? Or how do I do that? So it just really depends on what you mean by designing patterns and what your focus is. I design a lot of the things that I make from, I designed this top here. I had very specific things I wanted that I had in mind. I looked at a few other sweaters that or tops that were online, kind of how they were shaped, and oh, I like that idea, and then I figured out how low I wanted this and what kind of edging I wanted. I wanted a little bit of lace to make a sleeve cap, and I wanted a little lace at the bottom, and I wanted something very simple for the body. So I did a lot of swatching and figuring out, but I wasn't trying to do it in multiple sizes because I have to think differently if I want to do that. Some of my patterns are for one size only, like the fingerless mitts, it's one size. I have a hat pattern that, you know, can do multiple sizes. I have a few patterns that tell you how to use them in different yarn weights, and then what the different finished measurements will be if you use different yarn weights and how that can be used for different sizes. But I have not published sweater patterns, even though I design a lot of my own. And that's because I don't want to get into the whole grading thing. I like designing and then making it, and then I get to wear it. So they're just very different focuses. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have more Ask Me Anything questions that you would like answered, you can leave those down in the comments below. Or if you have suggestions for a Technique Tuesday video that you'd like to see, you can leave those suggestions down below too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.